Looking back, I can't remember a time when my life was truly my own. From the moment I could walk and talk, my mother had already planned out every step I would take. Where are you watching from today? Comment down below. Emily, sit up straight. Emily, speak clearly. Emily, pay attention to what Dr. Richardson is saying. That'll be you someday. My mother was a respected surgeon, and in her mind, I was destined to follow in her footsteps. There was never a question of if, only when. I still remember being 6 years old, receiving a child-sized lab coat and stethoscope for my birthday, while all I wanted was an art set I'd seen at the store. When I opened the gift, the disappointment must have shown on my face because my mother immediately said, "This is better than some messy paints that you'll forget about in a week. This is your future, Emily." Our home functioned like a military academy. My schedule was planned down to the minute. Piano lessons, not because I enjoyed music, but because it looked good on medical school applications. Advanced math and science courses. Volunteer hours at her hospital. Even my friendships were carefully curated. Only children of other doctors or lawyers were deemed appropriate companions. Art was my secret escape. I would hide sketches beneath my mattress like some kids hide dirty magazines. Late at night, after completing the mountain of extra credit assignments my mother insisted upon, I would draw by the dim light of my desk lamp. Characters, landscapes, comic strips, anything to feel like I had some small piece of myself that belonged to me alone. When I was 14, my art teacher, Mrs. Collins, entered one of my drawings in a statewide competition without telling me. I remember the day she pulled me aside after class, her eyes bright with excitement. "Emily, your piece won first place in the high school division. This is extraordinary. You're competing against students 3 and 4 years older than you." For once in my life, I felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. Something I loved, something I had created, had been recognized as valuable. The award ceremony was on a Saturday, and for the first time ever, I asked my mother to adjust her schedule for something I wanted. "It's really important to me," I said at breakfast, pushing the invitation across the table. "The judge is coming from the Rhode Island School of Design. Mrs. Collins thinks I could qualify for their pre-college summer program." My mother barely glanced at the paper. "Art competition? Emily, this is precisely the kind of distraction you don't need right now. Your biology midterm is coming up, and Dr. Winters' daughter got a perfect score last semester. You need to focus on what matters." "But this matters to me," I said quietly, surprising myself with my persistence. "I won first place." She finally looked at me, her expression a mixture of irritation and something else. Fear, maybe? "And what exactly will you do with a blue ribbon for drawing? Frame it next to your medical degree?" I went to the ceremony alone. Mrs. Collins took photos as I received my award, promising to give me copies. When I got home, my mother was reviewing patient files at the kitchen table. "How was your study group?" she asked without looking up. "It wasn't a study group," I said, the small trophy clutched behind my back. "It was the art competition. I won." She sighed, removing her reading glasses. "Emily, I let you keep drawing as a hobby because everyone needs stress relief. But this fascination needs to stay in perspective. Art doesn't put food on the table or pay college tuition. Some people make careers as artists," I ventured. The laugh that came out of my mother was sharp enough to cut. "Starving artists, you mean? Dreamers who end up waiting tables and living in shoebox apartments with 3 roommates? Is that what you want? Because that's the reality for 99% of artists." "But what if I'm in the 1% who makes it?" "You won't be." The finality in her voice made me flinch. "Not because you're not talented, but because I won't let you throw your life away on some childish fantasy. The world will eat you alive, Emily. You'll never succeed without me guiding you." I didn't argue further. What was the point? But something hardened inside me that day. I hid the trophy in my closet, behind winter boots I rarely wore. But every night I would take it out, this small, tangible proof that I could be something other than what my mother planned. High school continued as my mother orchestrated. AP classes, science Olympiads, hospital volunteering. My sketchbooks multiplied, hidden throughout my room like contraband. Mrs. Collins continued to encourage me, even helping me secretly apply to summer art programs. When I was accepted to a prestigious workshop at RISD with a full scholarship, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could convince my mother. I prepared a presentation. I'm not joking, an actual PowerPoint with slides about successful artists, career paths in design and illustration, statistics about the creative economy. I rehearsed in front of my mirror for days. The night I planned to show her, I came home to find my mother at the kitchen table with a large envelope in her hands. My name was on it, and the RISD logo was clearly visible in the corner. "Were you going to tell me about this?" she asked, her voice frighteningly calm. "I was going to tell you tonight," I said, my carefully prepared arguments evaporating. "They're offering me a full scholarship." "I called them and declined," she said, placing the envelope down. "I explained that there was a misunderstanding and you wouldn't be attending." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "You what?" "I've also spoken with Mrs. Collins. She won't be encouraging this nonsense anymore." "You had no right," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "This was my opportunity." "Your opportunity is the Johns Hopkins pre-med program I've been preparing you for since you were born," she said, standing up. "I've worked too hard to get you there to watch you throw it all away on some art fantasy." "It's my life!" I finally shouted, surprising both of us. "A life you're not equipped to manage on your own," she said coldly. "This discussion is over, Emily. You'll thank me someday when you're a successful doctor instead of a failed artist." I ran to my room and slammed the door, a childish gesture but the only rebellion I could manage. Through my tears, I looked around at my carefully organized desk, the anatomy charts on the walls, the bookshelf full of science textbooks. Nothing in this room was truly mine, except for my hidden sketchbooks. I pulled them out that night, flipping through pages that chronicled years of secret dreams. Characters I'd created, worlds I'd built, styles I'd developed. This was me, the real me, not the Emily my mother had constructed. The next morning at breakfast, my mother acted as if nothing had happened. She reminded me about an upcoming meeting with her colleague who sat on the Johns Hopkins admissions committee, reviewed my study schedule for the day, and suggested additional MCAT prep materials. I nodded mechanically, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, I saw my future branching into two distinct paths: the safe, prestigious road my mother had paved, or the uncertain, winding trail of my own choosing. I was 17, with less than a year before college applications were due. The weight of this decision pressed on me like a physical burden. To follow the path laid out for me, secure and predetermined, or to step into the unknown and risk everything, including the relationship with the only parent I had. That night, I sat in my room surrounded by college brochures for medical programs my mother had collected, alongside my sketchbooks full of dreams she'd dismissed. Two futures, two versions of Emily, and time was running out to choose which one would become reality. I wish I could say there was some dramatic confrontation, some movie-worthy moment where I stood up to my mother and declared my independence. The truth is much quieter, but no less life-changing. 2 weeks before high school graduation, I received an acceptance letter from the art institute I'd applied to in secret. A full scholarship, including housing. I hadn't told anyone I'd applied, not even Mrs. Collins this time. This was my escape route, and I couldn't risk my mother intercepting it again. The day after graduation, while my mother was at a medical conference, I packed 2 suitcases, one with clothes and necessities, the other with my art supplies and sketchbooks. I left a note on the kitchen counter. I need to find my own path. I'll call when I'm settled. No forwarding address, no details about where I was going. Just a clean break. I still remember the bus ride to the city, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I'd never been more terrified, or more exhilarated. For the first time in my life, I was making a choice that was entirely my own. Reality hit hard and fast. My scholarship covered tuition and dorm housing, but little else. I needed a job immediately. The only thing I could find was at a coffee shop 6 blocks from campus, working the 5 a.m. opening shift before classes. I'd never made coffee before. My mother considered caffeine an unnecessary stimulant and forbade it in our house. My first week was a disaster of burned milk, wrong orders, and constant reprimands from my manager. My mother called incessantly those first few days. When I finally answered, her voice was ice cold. "This rebellious phase ends now, Emily. I've spoken with the dean at Johns Hopkins. They're still willing to consider your application if you come home immediately." "I'm not coming home," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I'm where I want to be." "You have no idea what you're doing," she said. "No money, no connections, no plan. How long before you're calling me begging for help?" "I guess we'll find out," I replied, and hung up. That became her favorite line in the daily texts and voicemails that followed. "Ready to admit you've made a mistake? How much longer before you give up this fantasy? The real world isn't kind to dreamers, Emily." Each message reinforced that she expected, maybe even wanted me to fail. And honestly, I nearly did. I'd never lived alone before. I didn't know how to budget money, do laundry properly, cook anything beyond microwave meals. My mother had always handled everything, her constant refrain being that I needed to focus on my studies rather than wasting time on basic life skills. 3 months in, I was overwhelmed. Working 30 hours a week while carrying a full course load, eating ramen for dinner most nights, sleeping maybe 4 hours on a good day. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "You'll never succeed without me." Then I met Diana. She was the afternoon shift supervisor at the coffee shop, a 35-year-old woman with vibrant tattoo sleeves and more energy than anyone I'd ever known. She caught me crying in the back room one day after I'd burned myself on the espresso machine. Instead of the pity I expected, she handed me a cold compress and said, "Rough day?" Something about her straightforward kindness broke through my walls. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. My mother, my art, my struggles to keep my head above water. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Your mother prepared you for her version of success, not yours. But you're stronger than you realize." Diana became the mentor I never knew I needed. She taught me how to meal prep on a budget, how to organize my time efficiently, how to negotiate with landlords. More importantly, she taught me to believe in myself. "Your art is extraordinary, Emily," she said the first time I showed her my sketchbook. "Don't let anyone convince you this isn't what you're meant to do." 6 months into my new life, my mother's messages became less frequent but more pointed. She'd heard from family friends that I was working in food service, said with the same tone one might use for working in a sewer. The implication was clear. I had fallen far from the respectable future she'd planned. What she didn't know was that I'd started selling digital illustrations online. Nothing major at first. Character designs for online gamers, custom avatars, small commission pieces. But it was income doing what I loved, and each sale felt like validation. By the end of my first year, I had regular clients. My Instagram following was growing. I'd even been approached by a small indie game studio to design concept art for their upcoming project. It was just a side hustle alongside school and the coffee shop, but it fueled me in a way nothing else ever had. One day, my phone lit up with a text from my aunt, my mother's sister, who I'd always been close with. "Your mother's been showing everyone your Instagram page. Not sure how she found it, but thought you should know." I felt a chill. I'd never told my mother about my social media accounts. She must have been monitoring me all along, watching silently as I built my new life. The next morning, I had an email from her. No greeting, just a link to an article about an art school graduate working as a barista, with the caption, "Is this your 5-year plan?" I didn't respond, but that night I posted a new piece, a digital painting I'd been working on for weeks. A young woman standing at a crossroads, one path straight and sterile, the other winding but vibrant with color. I titled it "The Choice" and wrote in the caption, "Sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads to who you really are." It was the most personal piece I'd ever shared publicly. By morning, it had been reposted by a popular art blog, then another. Within 3 days, it had gone mini-viral in the digital art community. A small gallery owner reached out asking if I'd be interested in participating in an upcoming show featuring emerging artists. My first gallery show. Small, local, but real. I printed the email and taped it above my desk, a tangible reminder that I was on my way. My path might not be as straight or as secure as the one my mother had planned, but it was mine, and it was taking me somewhere. I never told my mother about the gallery show. But the night it opened, as I stood nervously watching people view my work, I felt a shift inside me. A quiet certainty that regardless of what happened next, I had made the right choice. This was just the beginning. 5 years can change everything. 5 years ago, I was making lattes at dawn and scraping by on scholarship money. 5 years ago, my mother's voice was still the loudest in my head, telling me I'd made a terrible mistake. Today, I'm standing in my own studio space in downtown Portland, finalizing details for my 3rd major game release. My team of 5 artists works across the hall, bringing my vision to life. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my reality. It didn't happen overnight. After graduation, I continued working at the coffee shop while freelancing as an illustrator. The gallery show led to connections, which led to more shows, which led to steady commission work. I built a portfolio, a client list, and most importantly, a reputation. The turning point came 3 years ago. A former classmate who'd gone to work for a mid-sized gaming company reached out about a contract position designing character concepts. The project was a fantasy RPG that needed a distinctive art style to stand out in a crowded market. My portfolio caught their creative director's attention. "We've seen plenty of fantasy art," he told me during the interview. "But your work has something different. Vulnerability alongside the strength. Your characters feel real." I got the contract. For 6 months, I poured everything into those character designs. When the game released to critical acclaim, with reviewers specifically praising the art direction, my career exploded. Job offers flooded in. I could finally quit the coffee shop. Instead of taking a full-time position at an established studio, I made what some called a risky move. I started my own small indie company with the money I'd saved. I wanted creative control, the freedom to build worlds on my terms. I hired 2 other artists I'd met through freelancing, rented a tiny office, and we got to work on our first original game. The learning curve was brutal. I knew art, but running a business, handling taxes, payroll, marketing. There were nights I'd sit on my apartment floor surrounded by paperwork, second-guessing everything. Diana, still my mentor and now a close friend, talked me through the panic attacks. "You're not just surviving anymore, Emily," she'd remind me. "You're building something that's entirely yours." Our first game was modest in scope, but distinctively stylish. A narrative adventure game with hand-painted environments and deeply personal storytelling. We launched it with minimal expectations, hoping mostly to break even. The game went viral. Not mainstream viral, but indie community viral, which in some ways is even better. Industry blogs covered it. Streamers played it. The art book we'd created as a Kickstarter stretch goal sold out in days. Suddenly, my little studio wasn't just staying afloat, it was thriving. I expanded, hired more artists, moved to a real office space. Our second game was more ambitious, with a bigger budget and higher production values. The success was even greater. Now we're putting final touches on our third release, which has major publishers watching closely. I built all of this without my mother's guidance or connections. Every victory, every setback, every lesson learned, they were all mine. I created the life she said I couldn't have. Throughout these years, contact with my mother dwindled to holiday texts and occasional updates through my aunt. I'd hear things, that she was still at the same hospital, that she'd been promoted to department head, that she'd mentioned me to colleagues as my daughter, the artist, with a tight smile that suggested disappointment. I told myself I didn't care. I was too busy building my career, too fulfilled by my work to worry about her approval. Most days, that was true. Then last month, my aunt called. Not texted, called, which immediately told me something was wrong. "Your mother's lost her position at the hospital," she said without preamble. "Budget cuts, they're saying, but there's more to it. She invested heavily in a medical technology startup that went under. She's in financial trouble, Emily." I sat with that information, unsure how to feel. My mother, who had planned everything meticulously, who had criticized my lack of security, was facing the very instability she'd warned me about. "There's more," my aunt continued hesitantly. "She's been following your career. The games, the studio. She has every article written about you saved on her computer. She's proud, in her way. Too proud to say it, of course." I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "She's never been proud of me a day in her life." "She doesn't know how to be," my aunt said softly. "But she watches everything you do." 3 days later, my email pinged with a message from an address I hadn't seen in years. My mother's name in my inbox felt like an intrusion from another life. "Emily," it read, "I saw the preview for your new game. The art is exceptional. I hope you're well." No apology for years of dismissing my dreams. No acknowledgement of being wrong about my future. Just a terse compliment and a social nicety. Classic mom. I didn't respond immediately. I was in the middle of finalizing the game, handling marketing meetings, approving merchandising designs. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The truth was, I didn't know what to say. A week later, another email arrived. "I'm planning to be in Portland next month for a medical conference. Perhaps we could meet for coffee. I'd like to see your studio, if that's not imposing." This was new territory. In 5 years, she'd never once suggested visiting. I found myself staring at her email far longer than necessary, reading between the lines. My aunt's words echoed, financial trouble, proud in her way. I showed the email to Diana over drinks that night. "You know she wants something," Diana said, ever protective. "Probably," I agreed. "But I'm curious what it could be." "Just be careful," Diana warned. "Some people don't change, they just change tactics." I agreed to meet my mother, suggesting a coffee shop near my studio. Neutral ground, but on my turf. We set a date for the following month, and I tried to put it out of my mind. Then, 3 days ago, another email arrived. This one less composed, sent late at night. "Emily, I'm sorry to impose, but my conference has been moved up. I'll be in Portland next week. I know this is short notice, but I was hoping we could still meet. There are things I'd like to discuss with you in person. I've been following your success from afar. You've proven me wrong in ways I never imagined possible." The admission was so unexpected that I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. My mother? Acknowledging she was wrong? It seemed impossible. The final line of her email was what really caught me off guard. "I'm very proud of what you've built, Emily. I should have said that years ago." I didn't know what to make of this suddenly reflective version of my mother. Was it genuine growth and regret? Or was it calculated, designed to soften me up for whatever she really wanted? Either way, I agreed to the earlier meeting. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll see my mother for the first time in 5 years. The woman who told me I'd never succeed without her guiding me, sitting across from the evidence that she was completely, utterly wrong. I don't know what she wants. Money, probably. But part of me, a small, stubborn part I thought I'd outgrown, still wants to hear her say it directly. You were right, and I was wrong. I recognized her immediately, sitting by the window at our agreed meeting spot. 5 years had changed her more than I expected. Her hair, once a rich brown like mine, was now streaked with gray. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than the woman who had loomed so large in my memories. She saw me too, standing quickly, almost nervously, as I approached. For an awkward moment, we hovered in uncertainty. Do we hug? Shake hands? In the end, we simply sat down across from each other. "You look well," she said, eyes scanning me critically out of habit. "Successful." "I am," I replied simply. "Both of those things." The waitress came, and we ordered coffee. My mother raised an eyebrow at my oat milk latte with an extra shot. Such trivial freedoms still felt like victories. "Your studio is nearby?" she asked when the waitress left. 3 blocks down. We're finalizing our 3rd major release." "Yes, I've read about it. The fantasy world with the unusual magic system. The art direction is extraordinary." The compliment hung between us, unfamiliar territory for us both. In my childhood, praise had been scarce, always couched in expectations for more. 98% on your test? What happened to the other 2%? "Thank you," I said, watching her closely. "That means a lot coming from you." Her eyes flickered down to her hands, which were fidgeting with a napkin. My mother, the surgeon with the steadiest hands in her department, was fidgeting. Something was definitely wrong. "Emily, I'll be direct," she said finally. "I've made some poor financial decisions. The hospital reduced my hours, and an investment I made, one I was certain would pay off, collapsed entirely." There it was. The request hadn't come yet, but it was circling, like a bird of prey looking for a place to land. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Your aunt may have mentioned some of this to you," she continued. "I'm not destitute, but I've had to sell the house. I'm looking at options, and frankly, I could use some assistance." The words seemed to cost her physically. My mother, who had never needed help from anyone, was asking for mine. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "What kind of assistance?" I asked, though I already knew. "Financial, primarily," she admitted. "A loan to help me relocate and establish myself somewhere more affordable. I've been looking at positions in smaller hospitals, but the pay cut would be substantial." I took a sip of my coffee, using the moment to organize my thoughts. And the sudden interest in my career, in meeting me after 5 years, is that related to your financial situation? Her eyes flashed with a familiar indignation. "I've always been interested in your career. I've followed every article, every release. Just because I didn't approve of your choices doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention." "You didn't just not approve, Mom. You actively tried to prevent me from pursuing the life I wanted. You said I'd never succeed without you guiding me." She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was trying to protect you from exactly the kind of instability I'm experiencing now. Medicine is stable. Art is unpredictable. And yet, here we are, I said, gesturing between us. The artist thriving, the doctor asking for help. A flash of the old anger crossed her face. If you're going to gloat... I'm not gloating. I cut her off. I'm pointing out that your fundamental assumption was wrong. You were so certain that your path was the only valid one that you never considered any other possibility. She fell silent, looking out the window. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its defensive edge. You're right. I was wrong about what you could achieve. The evidence is undeniable. She turned back to me. You've built something remarkable, Emily. Entirely on your own terms. There they were, the words I'd wanted to hear for so long. Yet they felt hollow now, coming alongside a request for money. How much do you need? I asked. She named a figure that made me wince. Substantial, but not impossible given my company's success. That's a lot of money, Mom. I know, but it would just be a loan. I'll pay you back once I'm established again. I studied her face, searching for the manipulative mother I remembered. Instead, I saw something I'd rarely witnessed in her: vulnerability. She was genuinely struggling, but there was more to her request than just money. In accepting my help, she would be conceding defeat in the narrative she'd constructed about my life choices. The doctor needing bailout from the artist. The wisdom of age yielding to the foolishness of youth. Why did you really reach out, Mom? Is it just about the money, or is there more? She sighed, her composure finally cracking. I'm alone, Emily. Your father died when you were young. You left, justifiably, I now realize. My colleagues see me differently since the demotion. I've spent my entire life believing that if I just followed the right path, did everything correctly, I'd be secure. Her laugh was bitter. It seems even the right path can lead to failure. I felt a complicated mix of emotions: satisfaction that she finally understood, pity for her isolation, and a lingering anger that still hadn't fully healed. I'll help you, I said finally, but not unconditionally. Her posture stiffened. What are your terms? First, this is a one-time thing. I'm not becoming your financial safety net. I'll help you get established, but after that, you need to stand on your own. She nodded stiffly. Second, I need honesty between us. No more passive-aggressive comments about my career. No more subtle digs about my choices. If you have concerns, voice them directly, and be prepared to hear my perspective in return. Another nod, more reluctant this time. And third, this is the important one. I need you to respect my boundaries. My business decisions, my personal life, my future plans, they're mine to make. You can offer advice when asked, but the final decisions are mine. You don't trust me, she said quietly. You haven't given me reason to, I replied. But I'm willing to try if you are. She was silent for a long moment, digesting my conditions. The old version of my mother would have bristled, would have turned this into a power struggle. Instead, she simply said, "Those are fair terms." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and initiated the transfer. The money will be in your account by tomorrow. Consider it the first step in a new relationship, if that's what you want. It is, she said, and for the first time in our conversation, she looked directly into my eyes without judgment or expectation. I was wrong, Emily. Not just about your career, but about how I treated you. I thought I was preparing you for success, but I was just trying to control the outcome. The admission hung between us, more valuable than any amount of money I could give her. As we finished our coffee, we talked about practical matters: her relocation plans, potential job prospects, my upcoming game release. It wasn't warm or intimate, but it was honest, perhaps for the first time. When we parted outside the cafe, she hesitated, then said, "Would you show me your studio sometime? I'd like to see where you work." "Maybe next time," I replied. "Let's take this slowly." Walking back to my office, I felt lighter somehow. Not healed, that would take much longer if it ever came, but unburdened by the need for her approval. My success wasn't in spite of leaving her. It was because of it. I had found my own path, my own definition of success. And ironically, that's what finally earned her respect. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "How did it go? Do I need to come rescue you?" I smiled and typed my reply, "No rescue needed." For the first time in my life, I think we're speaking the same language. I paused before adding, "She's finally seeing me for who I am, not who she wanted me to be." And that, I realized, was worth more than any validation I'd sought as a child. I hadn't succeeded because of her guidance, or in spite of her doubt. I'd succeeded because I finally understood a truth it had taken her decades to learn. The only path to genuine success is the one you choose for yourself.